Okay, so welcome to Animation Dissection. I am R. Magnuson, also known as Neeksy, and today I am here with Zorak and Metal Ray.
Hello.
So, what we're talking about today is RWBY. So,
I think it's a little
RWBY.
misconception to call Ruby an anime.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's very much trying to be. So, let's get started with the kind of like the background of what RWBY is, how it kind of came to be. As far as we're aware of, it came from the people that did Rooster Teeth,
Yep.
the Machinima guys, and the creator was then also someone who had worked in Machinima as well. So, Metal Ray will be our expert on this one.
Yeah, he worked in Machinima in a way. Like, natural Machinima is kind of, you're using a game and the game engine to make something. He more just kind of took character models and did action scenes with them. His most famous one, of course, was Haloid, which was, I'm pretty sure, Samus versus Master Chief. And that's what really got him noticed over at Rooster Teeth.
Notable for the fact that it has Master Chief take off his helmet and he's a lady, and then they make out.
Yep, that's exactly how it ends. And he likes working
A very
with
high
ladies
standard
for some
to
reason.
definitely recommend himself to Rooster Teeth. Like, oh man, this is great stuff. We need this.
But it was a good action scene. Like, I can't fault it for being pretty well made. After that, he started working on Dead Fantasy, which is like Final Fantasy versus Dead or Alive, which I think is still going to some capacity.
Is it an animation or a game or?
It's the same as Haloid. It's using these character models to do action scenes. There's no real story to it.
So
I think
it's
I
just a
think
series of action scenes, and it's an ongoing thing that he has going.
Yeah, like he just adds more and more characters. I think like in the recent ones he put in like Kingdom Hearts characters maybe.
Is there a point to this?
It's people fighting. That's the point.
So no. Okay.
So it's basically him kind of trying to remake Dissidia, essentially.
Basically, yeah. Except
okay.
except he did it first, I think.
So I would say it's more like the crossover stuff you kind of see on Newgrounds of like Mario versus Sonic. I made this awesome Flash cartoon of Mario fighting Sonic. Isn't it cool? Everybody like and subscribe me. You like Mario, you like Sonic, and here they are. And Mario shoots Sonic with a gun. It's like that kind of thing, which is dumb.
Yeah,
It's like the Bleedman guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Except there's one specific thing with his stuff, is that he always just uses females, which going into RWBY you'll notice is mostly female cast for some reason.
For some reason, that should be pretty obvious, I think.
Well, marketability.
It's on account of the dick.
Okay.
So when he got picked up at Rooster Teeth, he was first working on their Red vs. Blue because they had started adding animation into their show. Like they would had different scenes that were completely like motion captured. And apparently he does all the motion capture himself, which is kind of impressive, though it can be problematic at points.
To be honest, I'm surprised that RWBY is mocapped at all because it seems pretty just very lazily posered.
Yeah.
If I'm going to be honest.
Of course it seems lazily posered. It's made in poser.
Well, I mean more like where it's less actual mocap and more just, I'm moving these rigs
Yeah.
around. Look at this flappy arm. It explains a lot why the motion is kind of crap.
Yeah. Well, in terms of character acting, animators are basically a mixture of artist and actor. And the reason I was really surprised just now to hear that it was mostly motion cap is that usually people kind of resort to doing a lot of these flappy arm things when they don't really know how to fill the time or space of what's being talked about or the action, and having someone physically performing that and having
I'm not
run
really
out of
familiar
ideas
with
is
the
already a really bad sign
poser
to start
software. Is
Um,
it normal for like? Normally, when I think about mocapped actions, I expect there to be some level of fluidity to the motions. Does it being mocapped really explain like how jerky and terrible all the motion is? Like, because it looks like crap. Like, is that just like a level of fidelity that's intrinsic to poser, or is it just what?
From my experience with using motion capture, a lot of it actually explains a lot of the walking motions because in RWBY you'll see with a lot of the walking, it's kind of just sliding around, and that's because when you do motion capture, you don't really have any collision with the feet, so they're just kind of sliding until you kind of map it.
Oh, I see. So that's kind of where they have to correct it in post rather than aligning it to make sense or redoing it to actually make it look less crap.
From my experience, yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like that Team Fortress source that was released where when you run in-game, games usually don't keep track of steps on the ground in terms of reality. And so the point of using that source was that you could just run in-game and then correct the foot collisions with the ground later. And even in this case, apparently, Poser is not really able to do that. I mean, we can get into kind of why Poser was a really terrible choice for doing an animated series a little bit later, but I'm really interested in seeing or hearing about kind of the genesis of the creative process, because apparently,
yeah, it's
in terms of his world creation and narrative structure came from a very interesting process. From what I've heard.
Yeah, so the first kind of, I would say, almost red flag here is when he first came up with the idea, or when he was first noticed coming up with the idea. It was the executive producer, Bernie, who noticed that he was making something, and it turned out he was making the scythe. So the first thing made for RWBY was the weapon. Then followed the character that used the weapon. So I don't know if that was with all the characters, but it's kind of odd that the actual device came first, and then the character to use it came secondhand. I think, talking with world creation, I think I know what you're referring to, and that is the entire world that he's in was made from a stain of ketchup. Literally.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, apparently he was in, what was it, just like a random
like an
family
IHOP.
restaurant or something?
An IHOP.
Yeah, and there was a ketchup stain in a napkin, and that's essentially how he kind of created the world map.
To be honest, as far as things go, I mean, it's world maps are basically arbitrary anyways, so, I mean, why not? But that's still just kind of...
But
emblematic of his thought process.
But that's the thing, though. He talked about how important it was to him that there is a world created and the geography is very important.
He does seem very obsessed with the kind of foundations of his world more so than he really wants to execute it. And so it's very ironic that so little care is put into that, but he's so kind of meticulous about other aspects. So, like, there is this whole naming convention thing as well that is extremely kind of complex and kind of doesn't really serve too much of a narrative
They don't
purpose.
really matter at all either. Why don't you explain this whole naming basis? Actually, should we actually explain what this setting is before we go too deep?
Yeah. Well, it is a little bit difficult because it is kind of a mismatch of a lot of different things. There is a lot of Final Fantasy VII inside this, in the fact that there is basically kind of a materia, and it's really kind of difficult. So in terms of the world he's created, is that it's supposed to be this universe where people are at the constant threat of monsters.
Yeah.
These kind of basically animals with a bunch of rocks glued to them.
Spooky, scary monsters.
Yep.
Yeah, spooky, scary guys. And the thing is like, you never really see anybody kind of suffering the wrath of these monsters in any given way. Like, the towns aren't really besieged, and you never really see these great battles. The only time you ever really see it happen is when they just need a monster for the characters to kill in terms of narrative convenience. So, like, the setting of the world and the kind of inherent conflict that's supposed to be a part of the makeup of the world really never factors into the plot at all. It's just kind of frustrating.
Yeah, like, they spend a good amount of time at the beginning of the show in a rather long monologue just setting up this world where the important thing in this world is dust. That is what they call their magic stuff. And they're fighting these shadow creatures. Beowulfs, that's what they're called.
Well, that was the wolves, right? Then they have Ursas, and then
I don't.
And all these really
they
funny
called them.
names.
No, wait, now I remember. They called them the creatures of Grimm, because Grimm
Grimms,
fairy tales.
yeah.
So a big part of this, which one of the big things when it comes to setting up the the kind of the overall narrative is that all these characters are kind of references either to specific fairy tale characters or historical
Also
characters,
colors.
which and also they have to be colors, and then they also have to have the first letter of their name spell out a color for the team. And what's really funny is, okay, if I recall correctly, the convention either has to sound like a color or remind someone of a thing that makes someone think of that color.
Yes.
Which is just complete. At that point, you're just playing an association game with anything. There's no. That means there really isn't a naming convention.
I can completely.
I mean, he set up an entire guide.
You can do that sort of thing, but it's kind of a question of like, why? Why would you bother? What benefit is there? It's like, yeah, it's cute, I guess, if you can manage to make it work, but are you actually getting a benefit where people are like, oh, that's funny, or yeah, that's interesting? It's like, no, it's not really. You're just kind of arbitrarily setting things down, and it makes things actually confusing because the names are from all across the board and just make things just weird.
Well, that's exactly the thing, is that I think one of the big mistakes it's making is that it thinks that reference is the same thing as depth. So, we have a reference to Jeanne d'Arc, or we have a reference to Red Riding Hood, but none of that has any impact on the narrative. I mean, this is not like Princess Tutu, where the idea of fairy tales and stories has an inherent meaning
or it
to
has
the
some
plot,
sort of
or
symbolism
the
intrinsic to it. Like,
well,
the Red Riding Hood character does not have any real Red Riding Hood-ness to them. It's just she's a goofy.
She wears a red hoodie.
Yeah, that doesn't really count though. She's a goofy girl
Yeah.
with a red hood, with a sniper rifle and a scythe. Because
Well, here's the funniest thing is that, okay, let's say you need to come up with a weapon for Red Riding Hood. Why a scythe? I mean, the closest weapon if you read the story, it was an axe.
but you see,
yes, it was the woodsman,
anime.
but like an axe would actually have made kind of sense. I mean, and this is where it comes to this idea of style over substance and all these characters being references, is that it creates the illusion of this kind of depth and badassery that the narrative and the style never really backs up. And that's kind of one of the really frustrating aspects of it.
Yeah, you mentioned like them being based off fairy tale characters. Here's a little game. Can you guess who Blake and Yang are based off of? Blake being the black one, Yang being the yellow one.
That's one of the ones I've been having trouble figuring out.
Okay, so Blake is based off of Beauty and the Beast.
Is it because she's the cat girl?
According to the trivia off IMDb, this is reference to the name Belladonna, which is her last name. And in the Black trailer, she is with a boy named Adam, which is the name of the beast.
I don't know. Is that even a character, Adam?
Not that we've seen yet. He was in the trailer.
Great. So a trailer from how many years ago for a character that will never show up?
Yeah, it was a good year before I think it actually came out. And then Yang is based off of Goldilocks.
Oh, I get it. Because yellow.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, that's super deep.
I have no idea. I have no idea who Weiss is based off of. All I know is that her name is White in German.
No.
Well, I'm thinking probably
her name
Snow
is literally
White
White Snow in German.
Okay, so
she's literally Snow White, even though there's no real sleeping or princess thing going on there, other than she's just a rich snob and she has a sword and she's annoying. I guess is that things that Snow White's known for? Not offhand, no.
Well, again, here's the interesting part: is that it thinks that making the reference is enough. That's really, and it's just this kind of very amateurish, kind of teenagery way of dealing things. It's like he went to Literature Analysis 101, got into color analysis, and then just never went any further.
Well, to do that, you'd have to, go to college, and he dropped out of high school. Yeah. So.
Aha. Okay. So that explains a little bit of it.
And if those kind of references kind of drive you crazy, then you should look at some of the names of the weapons that they have, because some of them are literally just references with no kind of backup to it. What was this one? The sword that Weiss uses is named Mertenatzer, which is I don't even know. It's You have Gamble Shroud, and the Revolver Rapier, and the Crescent Rose, which are all just names. They really don't refer to anything. Like
Yeah.
Merkmaster is reference to a family of flowers, myrtle, which is usually found to be white.
Because everything has to be color themed.
Which, speaking of that, here are the official rules if you want to make your own RWBY character, and that's literally what he says. This is for
You know what I do.
the characters must be A, a color, B, something that sounds like a color, C, something that means a color, and of course, D, something that makes you think of a color.
Which could be anything. That just that's not a rule at all by that point.
The name RWBY actually makes me think of the color brown, because this animation is crap. But
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
So let's also talk about the voice acting. In that, as far as I'm aware of, they, for the most part, didn't really go through hiring actual voice actors, but instead used staff around the office or something like
There
that?
is one official voice actor, or official actor, really, who is in it. Have either of you watched Red vs. Blue?
I watched a little bit.
I'm not too
ages
familiar
ago.
with that myself.
The guy who plays one of the teachers is the guy who plays Caboose, and he's a Hollywood actor.
Ah.
And he's basically the only one. Everyone else is people around the office. The
What
main
do
girl.
they do at their office? I mean,
Let's see.
Really?
The
what
main
do
girl-
people do in the RWBY office that they actually have enough staff to make a voice acting staff? Really?
Let's see.
Well, I think it's for the Red versus Blue staff, so it's like community managers
Do
and
they still
like
make
maybe
stuff for that? Is that ongoing?
Yeah, let's see. Main girl is, she works with Achievement Hunter. She also does some of their weekly videos. The girl who does Weiss used to be their secretary, and now she works on their podcast. Let's see. One of them's a photographer for them, and the girl who does Yang is like their community manager.
and then the other ones are either the writers or the actual creator himself.
Yeah.
Who made a kind of a self-insert character.
That's basically what it is. I can't really say what else. His name's Lai Ren, the character, and it's basically Cloud mixed with
Sasuke.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So from what we get the sound of it is that this guy kind of did a kind of a mishmash of references and other works, like including there was a guide he had set forth for his writers, right, to as kind of like homework before starting.
Yes. He had all their writers, all being two of them, who.
I was going to
one
say
of
that.
them
Wait, they
plays-
have writers at all? What?
Well, they have three writers: Monty Oum, and then the other two writers.
Are they all asleep at the wheel?
Well,
Are
one
they
of
all
them
dead?
can't be asleep. Well, one of them can't be because he plays the main male.
Oh, well.
The other two writers are named Miles Luna and Carrie Shawcross. Miles Luna is the person who plays Jean d'Arc or whatever his name is in here.
Yeah.
And
Jean Arc, I think. Yeah.
And then Carrie Shawcross, his claim to fame is that he walked across New Zealand retracing the steps of the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings for a documentary.
Okay.
They were assigned to watch anime, basically. So, a certain collection of anime based on a list that was given to him by Monty. They haven't publicly released the list, but I found a good way to amalgamate it because, like every good anime fan, Monty Oum has a DeviantArt. And I've gone through his favorites to see what he's favorited in the past, and I can probably guess what they were asked to watch, by going through his favorites.
Let's hear this
Let's
list.
actually wait for that. Well, I'd actually like to wait till well, let's guess first.
Okay.
Just from what we have seen of the show and what elements that we could really kind of pull apart. I would say that I think the two big ones that really make up the DNA of the show would be Soul Eater, because I think there is some animation that's kind of just literally stolen from it, and then Naruto. as the other big influence in terms of just structure and the way it tries to breed conflict and just the general attempts at humor style. I really feel those two.
I would say those two are probably big. I would also say that there's probably Bleach, the Final Fantasy animation, like the Advent Children. I'm guessing there's a lot of that in there. What else would be possibly?
In terms of non-anime, I would say Harry Potter.
Well,
this thing
that's
just
kind
screams Harry Potter to me.
I don't know if that's actually a thing, though, as much as just generic fantasy school thing. Like, Harry Potter really pushed that heavy, but at this point, that's so ubiquitous everywhere in every fantasy thing. And I mean, there's tons of anime that are just that stamped a million times without even a hint of Harry Potteriness to it anymore. It's just archetype. Fantasy archetype.
If you mention Final Fantasy, then there's another series you have to mention with that, which is
Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
but there's
man,
no film
there's
of that.
Definitely
But
no.
Well, there is a manga of it.
Well, there's a manga of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a manga of my.
But yeah,
Okay, so how close were our predictions in terms of just reverse engineering?
About 100%.
Oh wow.
You forgot some of One Piece.
Oh.
Is there really that much One Piece in this?
I found some One Piece pictures in his favorites. So.
Well, I'm just trying to think like what actual One Piece in this.
Then there's also another big obvious one, Black Rock Shooter.
Oh well, I hesitate to even call that an anime.
It's a Vocaloid anime.
That's a good point though. That is super. Yeah, wow. Thinking about that is literally this. Yeah, and that also had the same sort of scythiness and just arbitrary just stuff. Which actually, that's an interesting comparison thinking about it, because that actually started entirely as one, a Vocaloid song, two, someone made a fan art to the Vocaloid song with a girl with a cool scythe and like barely any clothes on, and it's like, oh my gosh, let's make an anime out of this. And then they did, and it made $umpteen million. Well, not really, but probably.
Yeah, but you also have some Street Fighter stuff here, and yeah, I'm just looking through it right now. Yeah, definitely not Naruto. A lot of Bleach, a lot of Soul Eater on here. A little bit of No More Heroes.
Basically, it's all your generic shonen stuff packed in with a heavy layer of generic fantasy schlock, and you basically got RWBY's setting.
And it's basically 90% is just girls.
Well, of course.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I noticed is that it seems to really want to be a video game, and so apparently there is a big game project revolving around it.
Yep.
Apparently,
fan project is currently making. There's currently a fan project for RWBY, and it's gotten to the point where they're getting like it's in the alpha build right now, and they're starting to implement like multiplayer aspects to it too. I haven't even made the character models yet.
Of course.
Which I think kind of speaks a lot about it, because it kind of matches the show in that respect, where they put some stuff that you should put later on to the forefront while taking basic stuff and kind of putting in the background. And I think that kind of spells out RWBY to a T.
Yeah, it's very it matches in a lot of ways. So speaking of visuals, let's kind of get into what is visually kind of going on with this show. So first of all, they're using Poser.
Yep, Poser
to make a animated series, which
I have something to say on that.
Okay, definitely go ahead.
There was a documentary made by Machinima a little while ago over Rooster Teeth, and in that they talked a little bit about how Monty works, basically.
Okay.
Apparently, he's one of those guys that just works like 12 hours a day, nonstop, which I'm sure is good for you. But they talk about how he doesn't like updating stuff. When he got in, he had his version of Poser, which I think was like, he went to the company in like 2010, 2011, and I think he's using like a 2008 version of Poser. And they actually, for him, they went and updated his Poser to, have a bunch of new features and have some of the bugs cleaned up. And like a day later, he literally went begging to them, asking them to revert it back to the old version, because he just couldn't handle having a new version. So he would
So he's very much set in his ways then.
yeah, he would rather have an out, like he even says in the documentary, I would rather use the same program for 10 years than update every year, which
Okay.
which I guess he hit his 10-year mark because he's using Poser 2013.
So here's the thing I'm kind of trying to figure out with using Poser to make an animated series. It's kind of like using a storyboard software to make a final animated film, as far as I understand, because one of the big things I've really noticed in it is that there is no actual lighting mechanic in any of the animation that's being shown. Like, all the characters' shadows are painted on textures, and there is no... everything is 100% ambient light. Is that actually a feature of Poser itself, or is it just they didn't want to deal with it? Or, I mean, there's just like a lot of big questions kind of surrounding it, because this permanent shadow kind of creates a lot of problems, especially with I remember when we were screening these episodes, before we got to this, one of the big critiques was that the female characters, at least the main cast, the shadows instead looked like bruising or choke marks rather than actual shadows. The girls looked like corpses, and
How fitting, really.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're basically puppeted. It's like a Weekend at Bernie's, essentially. but here's the thing: is like, okay, CG is like really useful for certain types of animation, and you can actually do a lot of really great stuff with mood lighting and getting a sense of ambiance, which it never can do because there is no actual lighting. I mean, is this a part of Poser's problem, or is this just him not using it?
Well, I think a lot of it goes just with the name. It's called Poser. It's meant to be posing figures mostly.
So it's basically like a storyboard software, essentially.
Yeah. I personally haven't used Poser all that much, so I can't say a ton about it, but I've never really seen it more than making like artwork. Because I've only ever really seen it used to like just make digital art and yeah, it's kind of make concept imagery and digital art. I don't know, like really. I'm pretty sure if you go deep into the settings, you could probably find some lighting stuff. It just seems like because he had a team of animators working on this too. Like, it's not just him animating, even though he was head animator too, and director, and head writer, and one of the characters.
So there is definitely a budget of some sort behind this.
Yeah, they put a lot of faith into this.
Well, and here's one of the things I think that was really kind of interesting about it. Well, interesting, but is that so it's using CG as the basis for its animation, entire visual aesthetic, and I think what it falls into, and this is kind of an overall problem you'll find in certain animation production designs, is that it falls into this CG trap where people in the kind of higher ups of these studios thinks that these computers are kind of like a magic box that can kind of solve a lot of problems and make the production process easier. And I think that really doesn't take into account the limitations of the medium of CG. So, and probably also leads to why I think they ended up using motion capture is in CG as opposed to, let's say, 2D animation, is that things have to kind of move constantly or else people kind of get weirded out. And so if you have a static CG image, people think that, let's say, like a game froze or something's not right. But with a 2D drawing, and you'll often see this in anime, you can actually have a static image and maybe less smooth animation, and you can kind of actually get away with a lot of it.
You actually see that
And
very
that
commonly
really-
with like static 2D animation, like say anime, and that like if you actually pay attention and try looking, you'll notice that there's barely any animation actually involved most of the time. It's actually kind of spooky once you try looking for it, how little animation there often is going on in any given scene.
Yes, and it's because I think they know how to cheat, or not cheat, but they know how to use camera angles and cuts and editing and really kind of film technique,
Or just
to
or
get
just
around
how
that.
long they can actually hold that still without people actually noticing.
Yeah, and that works in 2D, where the human mind is a lot more accepting of that. But if you do the same thing in CG, people kind of get weirded out and it doesn't look right. So that's why I think all these characters end up being so floaty and having a real difficulty in doing the character animation because they have to fill up all the space at all the given time. And if you have a talk-heavy show and the characters expounding dialogue a lot and everything being tell, not show, that is really problematic for using CG. I would argue that I think this show probably would have been a lot better off just having hired a few 2D animators and just gone for a more simple production. Because even in the... Okay, so here's the thing with CG also, is that you can do some really intricate, beautiful backgrounds, right? Like, that's the big advantage of CG over 2D, is that you can do some really well-designed layouts and things like that without having to worry about what will happen when you change camera angle or do a tracking or moving shot. That's what makes doing actions so appealing in CG. When you look at the backgrounds in this show, though, they look flat. There's no shading. There is no texture. They look like, early 2000s webcomic backgrounds.
It honestly looks like it's something they just
really
took out of
missing...
like the clip file that comes in Poser, like, generic building 12. Place in here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Well, and then it looks really flat. And here's the other thing, is sometimes the backgrounds literally look like just flat images. They don't look like CG. Like the moon they have floating in the sky that's shattered for some reason. It looks like a flat paper object floating in the sky. And when you now contrast it with these CG characters, it looks really kind of weird. Because you have a flat background and these CG characters kind of on top of it. It doesn't work well. Although vice versa, you can kind of get away with that. But doing flat background CG character really kind of messes things up. It's like when you play one of those games where, like in the Persona games, where you have the CG background and then you have the 2D character when there's dialogue scenes. That it's kind of easy to get away with it. But if you reversed that, it would look really kind of odd. It doesn't feel like they're a part of the same reality.
It's like, why are you standing in front of this cardboard box, you weirdo?
Yeah, exactly. And again, it's one of those things where, okay, so we're going to use CG for the show. Why use CG if you're not going to use the benefits of using CG?
Well, the thing is...
Instead, it seems to be hindered by every aspect of the production model.
It's all coming down to one thing, ultimately. It's easier this way. This is the simplest approach you can take. It's lazier. I mean... 2D animation, you have to admit, it is a bit more expensive to do to get it to animate all the show. If you were to replace every single shot and every single bit of animation with the 2D equivalent, it would ultimately probably cost them more time and money. It's more effort.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if they just do the posing and, do the mocapping, that's relatively very trivial. It's not easy.
That's true.
But it's cheaper, and it is certainly much simpler. And if there's one thing this show really conveys, it's how cheap everything really looks, and how it's hard to say lazy, because I'm sure there was a lot of time put into it, but it really does look lazy.
Well, I'd say that's wasted effort. I mean, if you are not results oriented, I think that is the answer.
Well, looking at this, I would
know,
have to say that yes, that is where they're coming from.
Yeah. And I think that comes down to not having a good production designer. In that, I think people with very small staff can make really amazing stuff, but you have to have someone who knows what the final product is supposed to look like, how they want it to look, and then designing a process to get to that final look efficiently. And I think it's kind of like a lost art in a lot of productions, even some professional ones.
Even with this one,
in this case, I don't think he knows how to get to a final aesthetic that is both pleasing and efficient.
I mean, even that's obviously he doesn't have any sort of consistency with the overall design, because just look at the individual character designs. They're all schizophrenic, and he is the person who's presumably behind most of these designs, I would think. They're all over the place. They have no real coherency or consistency between them. They're from completely different things, and yet they're all just standing next to each other. Is this a crossover project? Oh no, these are all original characters. Why are they all interacting with each other? They all look like they've got... These clothings are from completely different eras and different, creative works. They're just all over the place.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a Fantastic World of Gumball, Amazing World of Gumball, but without really being interesting in that regard.
With
Yeah.
Gumball, I would say there's a degree of childishness, and the kind of it has its own aesthetic in it being completely.
Well, it's intentional.
Yeah, it has an actual aesthetic point to being completely eclectic. Everything all over the place. This just feels just confused.
Yeah, especially with the character models. Like, if you look at the hair, for example, some of the hair is textured from character to character entirely differently. And this is not to say, like, okay, well, people in general do have different hair. But in terms of just, like, if you look at, let's say, I think the self-insert character, if you look at his hair, he has included kind of like a shine texture on top of it. But the other characters, it's entirely flat, dull, opaque.
Yeah.
And some random background characters, again, they have texture added to the hair, but other ones, it's just completely flat.
Yeah.
There's no cohesiveness to how the characters have been modeled. And some of the hair looks like hair, and then some of it looks like just a random polygon poop that has just kind of landed on their head.
Feels
Yeah,
like
especially
go ahead.
Especially Yang. To go back for a second, we were talking about the time to make it earlier. Together, this is about like an hour-long production altogether, which is probably how they're selling it as like a hour-long movie on DVD. To do a good animated series, how long does it take?
To do okay. So an average show. So okay, let's look.
We might want to
varies a
qualify
lot
this, yeah.
depending.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. I would say that the average episode of a U.S. produced TV series.
Yeah.
So like let's ignore the Japanese model entirely in this case. I'd say that an episode of The Simpsons, I think, takes approximately 9 months to complete.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of like a lot of different management aspects going on with it and various things
There's
like that going
downtime
on.
involved.
And they have a larger staff, and there's also a lot of outsourcing.
Yeah, but
There's a lot of outsourcing.
how long ago did we do the screening of the episodes?
That was, I think, 3 weeks ago or
Yeah,
so?
the day before that stream was the announcement that they had started work on production of the second season of RWBY to premiere in July.
Aha.
So that gives you a clue on their turnaround time.
Whew, that is some really bad planning.
Well, I mean,
I've worked on a Christmas special where we were given 2 months to come up with a 40-minute classically animated episode. And that was a professional studio, and it was still a crunch.
And well, even I know you said you didn't want to make the anime comparison necessarily, but even with anime, typically there's a large run-up where they actually getting some base establishing things, and people are starting to work on some of the more complicated scenes, and then they crunch only during the generic animation to try to push through.
And they also work with a lot of different smaller sub-studios that will kind of pick up the
there's a lot of
slack.
Yeah, this is all in-house.
Yeah. I think the other thing, too, is that, like, I don't understand why the series bothers trying to follow certain conventions of structure. So, okay, it's not being shown on TV. None of the episodes are really long enough or structured in a way that any network would be able to fit that into their schedule in any comprehensive way. And I then wonder why they aren't just going to try to make it one long movie as opposed to this really strange butchering of these events into small, like 3-minute or 4-minute, sometimes 12-minute quote unquote episodes.
That's it.
With breaks that don't really make even narrative or pacing sense.
That's an easy like question to answer because they get like paid per video. So when they post it up with ads, they can get more revenue than if they were to post it up as one big movie.
Yeah, but the thing is that it wouldn't be that difficult for them to construct these episodes and actually make them mildly episodic. I mean, it's one thing to say, sure, that would take more time, but they could have, like, even in these little micro portions of this overall movie that they're aiming for, they could have there be some sort of micro arcs to each episode. That's not difficult. Some of these just don't make any sense at all. Like, why is it starting here? Why is it ending here? Okay, see you in, like, however many weeks or months. Okay?
Yeah, that's always annoyed me too.
I think it's a fundamental lack of understanding pacing and narrative. So
Should we?
the thing is he's trying to take this grand narrative that you could tell he really wants to tell this kind of larger story with backstory and emotion or something. It utterly fails in this regard, but you can see that that's what he kind of really wants to do, especially when you look at the mood and the tone of the opening animation thing. And he's trying to shove it into this kind of internet YouTube short, funny, lazy pillow guy. Like he does these small little cute gag-based shorts, and you can do a 3-minute short, but you can only really do something that short if you have an overall punchline to it. Otherwise, you're just artificially chopping something up. It's trying to shove this narrative into a box that it just doesn't fit.
If you're going to go for
and I think that's a fundamental
If you're going to
problem.
go for the goofy sort of episodic thing, the comment I made when we were discussing this previously is that if you look at like the abridged series of all the various types, say for example like the Dragon Ball abridged one, they're cutting up an existing episode to make these shorter episodes or whatever, but there still has like an arc and an overall punch where it doesn't feel kind of like, oh, it ended? What? Why did it end here? Why did it start here? It still feels like there's a curving arc to things where it starts, it goes, and it stops. And you're like, I understand why it stopped there. This makes sense. This feels episodic, yet it feels good. You know what I mean? There's an actual point. And this is editing existing works and cramming them together in ways that doesn't make sense. And the fact that can be done with an existing work, and yet with an original work they can't construct some sort of, overall structure to make this work in their own episodic way, just feels weird.
Yeah, given the complete freedom that they have, they still can't... It's like having that freedom, they still pretend that they have these limitations, which they don't. Again, the reason a lot of these TV shows... let's talk about getting down to the way the narrative is structured. It feels like I'm watching an episode of Power Rangers all the time, where characters... everything has to return to a status quo, right? The characters have to learn a lesson for this week or whatever, and then it has to go right back to unlearning that episode so they can kind of recycle it again. The reason so many shows in the past had done that is because of syndication. A lot of these cable networks and TV networks really rely on being able to show these TV shows out of sequence. So when you had a show that had a really tight narrative structure, it really kind of throws a wrench in these networks' plans. If you look at Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network, their schedule is almost all reruns of existing shows, usually kind of shown completely out of order in a randomized way. So a lot of TV shows have a very, considered soft continuity. Here's the great thing about being online. You get to set the method in which your show is being consumed. You're not at the mercy of having a network show all your episodes out of order and fucking with your plot. And yet this show really can't get beyond thinking outside of this repetition sitcom style storytelling.
I don't know if that's actually the reason behind this, though, because most of these characters, it's less that they're resetting things because, we needed to go back to status quo so we can make gag number 6 or whatever. It's because these characters aren't really characters. They're archetypes. They're concepts. They're kind of like
They're caricatures.
Exactly, they're caricatures. They're a caricature of an idea. Like, say, let's take, for example, the character Weiss or whatever, the snooty rich girl who goes through 2 separate arcs of coming to accept the main character and then resets back to square one, just because her entire concept is that she's the snooty rich girl that pops up all the time in anime and RPGs and whatever. That's her concept. That's all she is. There's not really a personality to her beyond that caricature. She could grow up and change to a whole new character, but that's not what they care about then. Then she's not the archetype anymore. That's not the base concept that they care about.
Yeah, and to bring that up, you also have to consider that this is not like a overall season development. They literally introduce the character and then have her learn the lesson in the next episode, then have her forget the lesson the episode after that, then have her learn it the episode after that.
Which is going to make really confusing when it's a unified movie, I presume.
Yeah.
It's like, didn't you learn this 5 minutes ago? What?
And again, that's exactly that is exactly the point I'm bringing up, is that it's treating it as if it is a TV series where episodes have to be shown out of sequence. If the fact that they're being able to publish online in any format they choose, and they're not even doing a good job in publishing it in an episodic format. Yet I think in terms of the way they conceived of these characters, the fact that they are just archetypes for the most part. I mean, I kind of want to get into the fact that the closest character to having some kind of arc is not even one of the main 4 characters in the goddamn title. It's just really, really weird that he's so stuck in this paradigm of relearning the lesson, being stuck in an archetype, when they don't have to do that. They can do something that's completely linear without being restricted by the methodology of showing.
Yeah, and in case listeners aren't exactly sure, like, what we mean by the structure is bad, there's literally an episode where they're in class and they have the Weiss character come down to fight another character, and in the middle of her coming down, they end the episode and start the next episode with the fight. They end an episode in the middle of a transition.
And then what's really weird is that, okay, so maybe you could think of it kind of like a go-to-commercial sting.
Yeah.
But they still add the credits, and then you have to sit through the opening again. But then the second half is not the same length of time as that first half. So they'll have like a 4-minute, then credits, and then the next episode will be 8 minutes. So like it maybe passes the test of being one of those 15-minute time slot shows, like SpongeBob, for example.
Well, I have a question for you, actually. Okay, so taking the base concept that they intend this to be a film, if you tied them all together, like you completely ignored the episodic format, would their overall narrative make any more sense or be less jarring? I say no.
No.
Because it's still a clusterfuck.
No, but I'm not saying... Well, I'm not saying that as is it should be a film. What I'm saying is that
I think that's what they're aiming
when you're
for.
publishing online, well, it's kind of hard to, because I can't tell if it wants to be a good TV show or if it wants to be a film. And the issue is what I'm saying is, why does it have to be these kind of weird episode formats when they could have chosen to show it in any way they wanted to? Like, I think what happened is they're really stuck in this kind of paradigm. They are so used to having watched these other shows as their framework for writing that they don't know how to think any other way. So that's why you have this really Power Ranger style, like, oh, Kimberly's going to learn her lesson this week. This next week, Blake learns a valuable lesson about not touching the stove. It's like there's no real larger arc going on. I mean, it seems to try to have that.
Well, the overall narrative...
it doesn't really... accomplish it in
but
any
the
way.
Overall narrative, even from square one, like of this volume 1 that actually exists from the thing that we watched, the overall narrative of it just doesn't really go anywhere. Like, you can tell he's kind of trying to set things up, sort of like, okay, so the first episode opens with the main character RWBY arbitrarily being pulled into a fight with a bunch of dudes.
It's not even RWBY. It's just a random narrator.
Well, you have the
no, we're talking about the first episode though, where she's in the
the post narration.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah. So let's do a really quick recap then. So okay, the series starts out after having kind of exposited in the form of a fake fairy tale the nature of the world, and RWBY is inside this 7-Eleven type of store that's selling materia and fun dip.
Yeah,
okay?
Dust.
And so she just happens to be attacked by this guy that looks like the guy from Clockwork Orange mixed with Rufus from Final Fantasy VII. And then by having created all this chaos and just happening to be in the right place at the right time, she is then invited to go to the school that her older sister is going to
hunt monsters.
And then to hunt monsters.
Which has nothing really to do with fighting this guy and his gang and his wizard.
It kind of just sidetracks the entire like point of the show that you exposited in the first 5 minutes is completely sidetracked for a majority of the entire show.
It's like, why didn't you open with her fighting the monsters? Or, and the guy's like, hey, you fight a monster nicely well. How about you come to my monster fighting school? Like that kind of thing. That makes sense.
But then this gets more complicated because later on, so as we go through the world's shittest version of a sorting hat, where they're forced to go through the tuning exam. I mean, the forest.
Yeah.
And they form
their
teams entirely by random.
I might add.
Yeah, the tuning exam forest, basically. Yes. And then, so it turns out that, spoiler, Jean, whose parents apparently were really big warrior types, he cheated his way into the school. So basically this Hogwarts school is considered this really powerful organization who has never heard of running a background check. He is able to cheat his way in and last quite a few months with no one questioning or looking into that in any way, shape, or form. And that's a big aspect to one of his big conflicts, whereas the main character also didn't seem to go in through official means, but that's a non-issue entirely.
Yep. I was actually going to
it's not even consistent entirely.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. Like his whole story in this first season is that he basically cheated and snuck his way into the academy, and then someone blackmails him. But apparently, like, you have to take a test, which is what he falsified or something, or he
has to go to a school beforehand.
Yeah. Except that the main character is just invited because. And one of the things that they talk about in the first scene, which, off topic, in the very first episode, they left one of the anchors for grabbing an object in the actual final animation. Like when she's eating the cookies, you can see the anchor where the cookies attached to her hand in the.
Oh God!
Well, that
so
animation
see,
is
the
terrible
IK
in
spines
general.
and all that.
Please include that GIF in the show notes. That GIF is the worst / best. Thing.
I will include that GIF and the GIF of the running animation.
Oh, I love those. Well, all of them. They look like they're running in Second Life or World of Warcraft.
And then lag happens.
They talk about when they first get her that her weapon is like her father's, which is the only time they ever mention her like father at all.
Well, didn't she also then say that she made it?
Maybe.
The thing, okay,
I just know they mentioned her father at some point.
Okay, so real quick. So they open with the fight with the dude. That's entirely established. The dude being a thing at the very end of this volume. Rather than them actually setting up the setting, other than the stupid intro thing. That's just weird. Why wouldn't you focus it on, like, it's basically like they couldn't figure out how to work this character in beforehand. So they had to, with it being a school environment, so they had to work it into the intro in order to set him up being a thing at the outro for the last little character fight thing.
Which, by the way, he's working with a woman by the name of Cinder, who is played by one of the only non-Rooster Teeth employees. Not a voice actress, but not a Rooster Teeth employee. She's played by famed cosplayer Jessica Negri.
Okay.
Because I'm sure cosplayers make very good voice actresses.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Well, okay, here's the big thing that I find really interesting is that I think the show, when you look at the first and maybe the last episodes, it has nothing to really do with either the fairy tale premise of the monsters and, humanity and the whole point of being what's called a hunter or huntress. And I think the show really, really wanted to set it into a school for one reason or another. So you have these very ass-backwards way of forming a pretense of getting the character into that school environment, because he needs to, for conflict's sake, to stick these characters, find a way to bring the four main characters together in a way that, despite their conflicts, they have to stay together. But he couldn't come up with like a good dramatic reason to otherwise do it. So he had to stick a school environment where there's some kind of rule that they have to stick together.
Can I make a real quick aside?
Or something to that extent.
I have a question for you, Metal Ray. Why is the main character named Ruby Rose, yet her blood sister, supposedly, who has a completely different complexion and hair color, has the name Yang Sheng Long?
Because, you see, Ruby is a reference to red, and Yang is a reference to yellow.
But those names do not indicate any sort of relation whatsoever.
Are you questioning Monty's brilliance?
Yes, I am.
Well,
This
and this brings up another question. Her sister is supposed to be this like experienced prodigy, right? Like she talks about like the fact that she wanted to follow her sister, but then her sister is in the same year starting out as RWBY.
Yeah,
in the
They're not
actually,
even
I think
sisters. Like, they're just like best friends.
I think once they say that Yang is in like the year above her.
But
I think, like,
they live
I
in the
think
same dorm, and they go to school at the
they
same
live in the same
time.
doors.
in the same goddamn classes and they're the same team. Like, what is the rule here?
I think they say a lot of stuff that kind of just gets forgotten and dropped because,
Yeah.
like, this is well, I know it's a shocking revelation, but there's also apparently a famed huntress, like a famed person that does what they're going there to learn to do.
Yeah.
The Amazon lady, like Pyra's her name, but apparently she's so famous that she's been on cereal boxes, which they make a joke about that by having a cereal box appear behind her.
You know what? I'm cynical enough to believe that they came up with that entire backstory for her just for that stupid cereal box gag. Just so they could do
Well,
that.
they had to somehow express her competency because she is the super competent one that juxtaposes with the guy who's not so competent because he cheated. So,
Speaking of that team, we talk about Lai Ren, played by Monty Oum. Not only is his character basically Sephiroth Goku the Stampede, there's a freelance.
Well, I'd say he resembles Sasuke for me the most.
I just wanted to make a freelance astronauts reference.
Yeah.
Not only did he give himself like the cool dark character, he gave himself a fangirl.
yeah.
Well, let's actually get to this other team in the sense that I would say that the biggest missed opportunity in this show is the fact that I think oddly Jean is the probably best developed character that has some kind of motivation that comes from some kind of backstory past his prologue. I think one of the big mistakes of this entire show is that it does not understand either show don't tell or that past his prologue. So none of the characters in the main team really have pasts that kind of influence their decisions or their overall desires to do anything.
You're forgetting about white girls' racisms.
Well,
yeah,
we'll get to. Well, I do want to get to that. Okay, but I think Jean is the closest thing to having an arc. So he has a very. I mean, he spells it out. I mean, I think the show would actually benefit from using flashback effectively to give gravitas and make some of these emotional turns feel earned, as opposed to just telling people how they feel or just explaining what their past is. But Jean has the idea of this kind of familial obligation. His entire family is this long line of respected warriors, and he has this inferiority complex, so he goes to the school to prove himself. And in some ways, yes, he does fail a lot, but I think in his arc, he does show some kind of capability of having either a moral compass and sometimes accomplishing stuff.
Which off topic, I want to say, like, what does his family think he's doing?
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of questions. I mean, again, like, if he comes from a famous family, how come, the school would not realize that this guy whose history they should ostensibly know does not match up with his transcripts? Again, I'm just talking about in terms of character emotion, in the sense that the idea is that in terms of storytelling, one of the things you really need to do is a character has to kind of have a goal, and you have to have kind of an obstacle to reach that goal. But I think something that a lot of these types of basic stories really miss is that in order to have that goal have meaning, you kind of have to understand the past of the character and why they want that goal. So I think one of the big things with this entire show is that why does RWBY want to become a huntress? It's never really kind of shown or explained, and the show is either trying to be kind of Lost style, where it's thinking that being mysterious is the same thing as having a good plot.
I think you're giving them too much credit there.
Maybe. I mean,
which is very scarce credit to give, mind you. But even then,
yes,
too much.
Exactly. Well, it's trying to be really mysterious with the teacher and all that.
Oh, that's just being generically
his...
animated.
Speaking of the teacher, speaking of the teacher, I just kind of realized something. They really have two narrative flaws, which is either they are extremely ham-fisted in what they say, where like every joke has to be beaten to your skull, or like the pieces of like plot that they want you to do, they just don't really do it well enough. Because I think during that whole scene where they're talking about his like past and everything, and how he snuck into the school with a famous family, at the same time, you're having the teacher talk to Weiss, teaching her again about the importance of teammates and everything, and they make sure to talk about everything, every choice is made for a reason. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think that they are trying to insinuate that they know that he's not supposed to be there. They're just not doing anything about it.
I presume that's a given, because the whole thing that he's made to be the team leader is so obvious a narrative setup.
Yeah, but they do it.
But at least it's a setup that kind of fits the character's desires. The whole point of the character, again, I'm not saying this is great. I'm just saying this is the closest thing to having some kind of character motivation, which oddly makes him the closest thing to a semi-compelling character, is that he has a very understandable motivation and his goal. He wants to, he has the inferiority complex.
He has some conflict
and
in front of him.
And he wants to prove himself, and being learning how to be a leader, or being a leader in this type of group, is his struggle, is the rising action of his plot.
Meanwhile, you have RWBY, who is just perky anime girl. That's it. She's perky anime action girl.
Well, and she wants to be a huntress because it wasn't in the first episode. All she does is she kind of fangirls about it. But okay, so let's look at a show, for example, let's look at Attack on Titan. If you looked at just the character of Eren, the main character essentially, and you just never showed his origin at all and started him off in the Survey Corps, he would just be a really uncompelling, ununderstandable character. His psychosis would just be completely empty. You wouldn't really understand his motivation. The whole point of showing the Titans attacking his town and killing his mother and things like that lends credence to his goal. It gives emotional weight to why he makes these decisions. The show could have easily shown the importance of these hunters and huntresses by just opening with monsters attacking a town and seeing characters getting saved, maybe as children, they got saved by a hunter-huntress. That gives that character some kind of connection.
But the thing is,
some kind of understandable goal. It's cliche, but at least it gives that character some kind of emotional weight.
And if they hadn't done that with the protagonist, and you can have a protagonist that doesn't actually have an incredible level of motivation to the overarching plot, you could say, look at the original Dragon Ball with Goku. His entire thing, he didn't really care early on about much of getting the Dragon Balls. He gets roped in. His entire thing is that he's the goofy outsider, whereas all the other characters involved have the motivation, but he's the competent one. Yet he doesn't actually care. It's the juxtaposition that he is the main character, yet he is the one who is the only one who isn't there, but is still just going along for some pretense. Early on, that's how Dragon Ball works. But with this, all the main characters basically just kind of have this thing they want to be hunters. Okay. Why?
Yeah, well, again, we don't know why, because they're so... And so their successes and failures have no emotional impact.
It'd be one thing
on
if
us
only one of
way.
them was like that. Only one was kind of riding along. Then you can make that interesting. You can go for the Sun Wukong sort of thing where it's just, they're just there for the ride of it. And that's just that one character. But it's the entire cast. It's why is anybody caring here? Why are they here? Why should we care about these people? We don't.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's the sad thing, is that the only one that kind of has that is not even in the main four that are in the title.
Yeah.
Also,
I'd actually be hard.
That's the
also
weird part.
His color theme is jaundice.
Yeah, he has a fucking liver disease that, it's... Yeah, and well, here's the other thing, too, is, so even within his arc, it's filled with the cliches, this bully has, figured out a secret. It's something you would have seen in, a really bad episode of The Weekenders or some other one Saturday morning thing on ABC. His entire plot,
a very special
and,
bullying episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, or now to be a part of the cool kids, you have to bully one of your friends. Oh, he did the right thing after all. Again, cliche as fuck, and it's borrowing from sitcoms, essentially. These people, I think, just watched a lot of sitcoms and don't think outside of that in any way, shape, or form. So, and again, okay, so we were talking about, at one point, the terrible race is a bearable. You know what actually would have made that kind of thing maybe somewhat swallowable is maybe you do a flashback where you see the effects of, let's say, that White Fang group on her as a child and see how that, affected her view of the world. And then also you do maybe a thing with Blake again, rather than her expositing it, you show, not tell,
should we explain for those,
the way she lived.
Before we go too much onto that, should we explain kind of what's going on for the people who probably spoilers?
Yeah, they're furries.
Don't feel like you should actually have to watch this show because it's really fucking bad.
Yeah.
So just take our word on that, but if you want. So for the people who aren't watching it, we'll just real quick explain. So the setting thing is that basically world full of humans, but they also for some reason have these animal people who are just basically, you have cat girls, you have monkey guy. I don't know if we ever saw anything else. Did we ever see any other animal?
Rabbit. Oh
girl. Yeah, rabbit girl.
And they all have 4 ears because they have human ears, and then animal features just stay on top.
Confusing. Yeah, rabbit girl named Velvet because she's a velveteen rabbit.
Yeah. So.
And velvet's not a color.
Yeah, velvet isn't a color. And of course, because he loves anime so much, you have the monkey man named Sun Wukong who uses a staff.
Literally, his name's Sun Wukong.
And he looks like Zidane from Final Fantasy IX.
Yeah. But anyways, the fantasy setup for the thing basically is that they have these faunas, I believe they're called, and the entire
literally the word for animal.
So the entire thing is that they're treated as being bestial or unhuman, in kind of the most generic fantasy anime, fantasy racism thing. The same thing you see in every JRPG or D&D thing or anime where it's like, oh, there's cat people. Well, they're treated as being subhuman, even though they look nearly exactly the same as humans and behave exactly the same. And the whole thing is that...
One of the things that I had, and one of the things about it is they played, the whole racism angle, but they don't even go really far into that. She says some... somewhat off-color things about, people, about, these animal people, but, I mean, it doesn't feel like she's being, a out-and-out racist, which I think they're trying to, show. It just feels she's...
They kind of do. They have her throw some casual racism in terms of the...
You can't trust an animal person, all they do is steal.
Yeah, it's like, those faunas, they all, it's that type of casual racism style dialogue, but...
He found replaced commentary about African Americans. It's replaced it with faunuses, and that's basically all he needed.
Or and there's apparently some kind of apartheid situation with a lot of it, and so there's these rebel groups, and it's like a civil rights thing, and it becomes a very terrible kind of critique of the Black Panther Party in the most ahistorical understanding of racial politics I have seen in a while.
Real quick question. Are there any black people in this anime at all?
No. There is maybe a character who...
Oh, yeah, we were introduced at the very end. There was one character that looked possibly darker skinned. That's right.
Yeah. So that kind of makes this thing even a little bit more leaden in its ability to kind of comment on this type of stuff. So, So one of the characters, she hides her cat ears under a bow, and she was apparently originally a part of this separatist movement.
I want to real quick pause and point out that I called that shit before it was even revealed.
Oh yeah, you did. I mean,
the second I saw that ribbon, I was like,
obvious.
"That's going to be hiding cat ears, isn't it? She is a cat girl, isn't she?"
Well, she also has cat ears and real ears for some reason.
Yeah, I know. Why is that? Why is it? Wait, the monkey guy didn't have monkey ears. Why did he get them cut off?
Because he just has a tail. The other ones don't have tails.
Do they?
So he's the only his instead of animals, he just has a tail. The other ones just have ears. I don't see tails and shit.
Well, we've not gotten to know them intimately enough. Perhaps they do have tails.
No, not very much.
Actually, Blake has a tail.
No, she does?
Yeah.
How would they not notice?
Because she has it wrapped under a sash, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, but here's the thing so Weiss is really against these, fauna people because they apparently just killed her dad. That's as far as we really get in terms of her motivation. I think she has just a couple sentences where she goes you want to know why I hate these guys? They killed my dad!
Oh.
That's kind of it. That's about as much. And again, I look at all these way better shows that learn how to actually earn the emotional moments and kind of create conflicts where you can kind of see the backgrounds of the two characters.
I thought the thing they just made her dad angry and they treated her bad. It's even less than that.
Did they? Oh, something like that.
I'll look it up.
Okay. I might have just misremembered, but the idea is that instead of, let's say, showing, like maybe doing a flashback, her as a kid, seeing the emotional impact and how it might have made her life difficult, that would actually have the audience kind of sympathize with her. And then you also do the Blake background to show how everything was really unfair to her. Instead, she just explains it, and they do it in a bunch of like chibi drawings or 2D drawings, and she explains it, which doesn't have the same emotional impact.
Okay, so the White Fang's activities seem to have contributed a difficult childhood to Weiss. The fact that the White Fang have consistently disrupted SDC's activity had caused Weiss' father to be frequently angry, further worsening her childhood.
So basically, didn't actually do anything directly to her family.
It's even worse. So it's even dumber. So
you
again,
animal people made my dad slightly cranky. Y'all need to be purged.
Again, and that's the thing is, like, if you wanted to give like that, and the show tries to treat that as if that's a huge emotional revelation,
Gasp.
With the camera angles and gasps
my dad
and everything.
was grumpy.
Exactly, and so it's trying to get these emotional points that it just doesn't earn.
Well, for some of that with her character, she is the rich, snooty character, and that also ties into the whole rich, snooty character archetype of, the rich, snooty character, she's rich and snooty, but her parents didn't treat her very well. That's just part of the old, stereotype and, caricature of the rich, snooty anime
Well, that is a part of... Well, yes, that is a part of the archetype, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that... Okay, just because you use an archetype doesn't mean that you can't
I know.
use it
I'm not saying
effectively.
that's why they should be doing that. I'm saying that's why they did it.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's lazy.
Oh, of course. Yeah, well, again, even just doing, like, a simple flashback and just, again... showing how maybe her dad's outbursts affected her emotionally, just something, just showing.
The issue
rather
with
than
that,
just
though,
telling.
with that, one, they'd have to make a character model for her dad, and he might not show up again.
Oh,
Two,
yes.
they'd have to make a character model for her kid self, and
Her
they
as a kid,
established
yeah,
the fact that anytime they wanted to do flashbacks, they did the really crappy 2D animation that they inserted in.
And not just that, they just, instead of, again, even with the crappy 2D drawings, it's still them just talking.
Yeah.
It has no.
It's
again,
not 2D,
no
it's
impact.
not even 2D.
So this conflict feels empty.
It's not even 2D animation. It's 2D pictures. It's
stills. Yeah, they're stills. I mean,
sorry, I was giving them
again,
too much credit. That's very difficult
yeah,
for me.
and so again, like there's like some fundamental ideas is that it's kind of missing the idea that past is prologue. If you look at a show like Space Brothers, that show really knows how to earn its emotional moments because it calls back to all these things that are very character based that have been shown, and even if they have to then do another flashback later to add a bit more, it's again not being done in a cheap way, but it's being done to show, that's why this character came to this conclusion. I can kind of sympathize with them, even if maybe they're being a jerk. I can at least see why the character's behaving the way it does. It makes it understandable, as opposed to it feels like this character just has to be snooty because we need conflict for this episode, and we need someone to learn a lesson, and we don't want it to be either Yang, RWBY, or Blake because we like those characters too much.
It just occurred to me that we kind of went on this aside from trying to describe the plot, and we got as far as episode 2.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
Well, maybe we should dial back real quick. So,
yeah.
Okay, so let's go back. So she gets accepted to school. And they go through...
Which I just looked up. All the characters in the show are 17, but she's 15. So everybody's 2 years ahead of her, basically.
Okay.
Okay.
That kind of explains things a little bit.
So she's supposed to be the prodigy main character that got to do it.
Yeah, but she was moved ahead 2 years due to certain events, is what the trivia says.
Oh.
So I'm guessing those are the events
Okay,
of
so
episode
again...
1.
or just
She fought
hinting,
that guy
hinting
with
at
the
some
hat
kind
good.
of past. Yep.
Well,
And she had all that collateral damage. It was great.
It makes it funnier because, like, it's almost kind of sad in a way for Jean because he had to work through all this lying and cheating to get to where he is, and the main character just got there anyway. So it's like he should have just fought off some random villains, and he wouldn't even have to lie.
He's crap. He's terrible.
Well, and again, for her, it was completely fucking dumb luck. She just happened to be in the right place at the right time. You know what actually would have made that compelling? Is if she had somehow sought out these types of battles as a way of proving herself.
She just, instigated
even
them.
that little change. Well, no, like, I mean, it would have shown that she had some kind of desire and gumption and that she was able to kind of handle her own, thus become somewhat impressive in terms of her, her fortitude. In this case, it was like, oh, well, like, good thing you were in that store when these guys stole all that fun dip. It's like, such small little changes.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of considerations could have really at least given the character some kind of either personality or drive.
Yeah.
Like, that's so much. There's so many missed opportunities just for small little things to give that extra oomph,
Yeah.
So
anyway, that's the entirety of the first
she gets
episode. She gets accepted to the school. The second episode is literally just her on the blimp with her sister or whatever. That's literally it. The third one is like, school intro thing where she meets the rest of the protagonist stuff.
And she's upset that she hasn't made a whole bunch of friends on her first day.
Because,
Oh, and also she wackily almost explodes because wacky.
And then from that point,
she wackily does explode.
They then all sleep in the same hallway because, having a bunch of, 17-year-olds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sleeping in one big open area
Co-ed.
together, co-ed. There's nothing bad's going to happen there. And so then
a bunch of kids had to drop out due to teen pregnancy, and then
I just thought of it because after they do all the Sorting Hat stuff in the Forest of Doom, what they do is they go to they go to their rooms, which they all stay in the same room. Which, going back to that point, they show that Jean and Pyra both stay in the same room too.
Oh, yeah.
Like Pyra,
there's a co-ed room.
Oh yeah,
too.
it's co-ed. I mean, I went to a co-ed college that had co-ed bathrooms, but we did not have co-ed bedrooms. That is beyond the fucking pale.
Yeah. So basically, they go through this forest of death for 6 or 7 episodes or something, where they just fight monsters, and it's really kind of inconsequential.
Well, the characters argue and scream at each other in the middle of battles, and we have the two most compelling characters. We have Giant Scorpion and Giant Crow.
I love you, Giant Scorpion. Marry that crow. Have the most beautiful children ever conceived in this setting.
Well, basically, it was the forest of contrived conflict.
Yeah. And the best characters.
I mean, and then there's a bunch of exposition about how characters have various superpowers and auras, which...
For some reason, John never heard this before, despite coming from hero family. I realize he cheated to get in, but you'd think he would have read a fucking book or something.
Or something, or just living in the world where that type of thing exists.
Haven't you seen the news?
When you're 17, you're aware that oil, for example, exists. So, having the characters not know what dust is, apparently the most important fucking thing in the world, is so weird.
Which, by the way... He's been there 2 years. He's 17 years old.
Well, is that how it happens? Or I thought the thing was that they all got in at 17, and then she got jumped up.
Yeah, they're all in the first year.
Well, here's what the trivia says, basically. It says, all students, characters in the series are 17 years old, except for RWBY, who's 15, but has moved ahead 2 years due to certain events.
Well, yeah, but I presume that means that, you start this school at 17.
It's like she skipped middle school, for example.
I get it now, okay. But that'd be the equivalent of someone sneaking into the military and not understanding that there's different types of guns.
It's what's bullets?
Yeah. Or just not knowing, a basic fact of the world. It's even less than that.
There are
countries people who just have powers out there. When you're 8 years old, you must have at least heard about something like that. Even just inconsequentially, just encountered that type of thing. If it's so,
well, it's an arc. It's the thing that they're kind of go for, because you do often need some sort of means to explain this. It's just that they went for the most lazy, terrible way of explaining this basic setting detail. You could explain the simple details from, say, trying to explain something more complicated and just starting it as the basis of it, just to explain it. You need. In order to do this technique, you need to use your auras to do this. As you can do your aura thing, do it to do this. And then John be like, "Oh, I don't know how to do that."
Well, it's like watching an episode of Naruto.
Yeah.
You have the character that's there to just explain how that move works. And again, it's unnecessary padding. It this whole aura thing, like, yeah, it's a world building detail, but why spend? It's like she spent 2 minutes explaining it to him.
Well, because she's explaining it to the audience, not actually him.
Well, no, but again, like, she's spending 2 minutes explaining to him vis-a-vis the audience, essentially. But to what end does the audience need to know the intricacies of it?
We didn't actually need to know
that's the issue I'm having. So they go through the forest. They form their teams by randomly select. Okay, so I thought the whole premise of the forest is that because they seem to have cameras everywhere, and you can see the teachers looking and observing them, going, I know, I'm going to assign these two guys together. Well, no, because in the end, it's, did you happen to pick up this chess piece? Well, now you're a team.
Yeah, that was weird, because I thought the whole point was that they were observing them to see who worked together, or what people matched up well, because that seemed to be what they were doing for the team lead things, but then...
Well, again, because the teacher then says, I've made big mistakes in the past, but, I'm really sure that you should be the leader here. It's like, you didn't pick! Like, she just happened to be in the group, and then somehow it spelled out her fucking name.
Yeah.
Well, you see, it's fate.
Yeah.
Fate chose
the fate of colors. The most overpowering
which is just
fate.
Lazy fucking storytelling. And again, like, the weirdest thing is the characters are just screaming at each other in the middle of battle. And it... Well. Like, yes, you need to have some kind of, like, dramatic things, and, all sorts of superhero narratives have characters saying long things in the middle of battles. But in here, it just seemed even more awkward than normal.
I think the most telling thing is that they have a conversation while Scorpion is, like, rampaging towards them. They just have, like, an extended conversation. Like, oh, yeah, Scorpion. We should do something about that.
And even the choreography doesn't make a lot of sense, where characters are using shotguns with a whole bunch of their friends in the line of fire.
Because it's anime.
It's a shotgun.
Because it's a video game.
Well, yes.
It's an RPG.
Yeah.
It's a shotgun attack.
And actually, they literally do have health bars.
Yeah.
That was the worst part, is that they think either the audience is so dumb they can't tell a character is in danger in a battle that they have to have a fucking health bar to give some kind of, this character's in trouble, this is going to be a really hard battle. It's like, like, you can't show, like, injuries or scratches or something to kind of illustrate that without just, like, here's a health bar.
By the way, with talking about, like, the ineptitude of some of the narrative storytelling, they had a really, really obvious, like, form of symbolism. It's probably one of the more overused pieces of symbolism, which is the chess pieces. Like, whenever chess is brought into something, they usually have meanings for each of the pieces. Except, these don't have any meaning. Like, they pick up a thing, and then they fight. Their fighting style doesn't really, like...
reflect any of that.
Yeah, they literally brought in something that they had inbuilt symbolism for, and then...
Well, and that's really simple ones. That's stuff you can actually build a character entirely around, that kind of symbolism, because it's classic narrative.
You could have said, like...
Well, and guess what? Why is it Red Riding Hood? Why is it Snow White? It's the same question. Yeah. It's reference is good enough, apparently.
Like, actually...
That's what it is. They leave it...
Yeah, it's even down to, like, the later conversation where Weiss is questioning why she was chosen to be leader. He could have even said, like, well, fate chose her because fate had her choose the king piece, which means that she, deep down, is like a strong leader, which I don't even know what piece she chose.
Well, no, because they all had to pick the same piece. So, like, we all picked the rook, or we all picked the knight. And again, that's how they got joined together. And again, it seemed to imply there was a lot more thought process behind it, when there really wasn't. I mean, even the teams in Naruto had an explanation of, like, this is why we paired them up, and that became a big thing about why they interact with each other, and setting up lessons about how the characters are supposed to improve by having the conflict with each other. In this, it's just fucking random, and it's just pretense to get the characters
together. And luckily,
together.
They all spelled color names, thank God.
Exactly.
That would have been the end of the world
lucky.
If they didn't. Oh my God, what if they spelled funk? What color would funk be?
Or what if one of the other ones was the leader, so the first letter was different, and you can't possibly spell a color with it?
Well, I mean, like, until you mentioned earlier, I thought that was what happened with one of the other ones, but then you point out that's spelled cardinal, I guess, or like CRDL.
Is that what they're going for with it?
Cardinal.
Is that honestly what they're going for?
Literally, the leader of that team is literally named Cardin.
Oh, point, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, like, what if you had, like, Peter, Oz, Otani and Patrick. Then you'd have Team Poop.
Which would make you think of Brown.
Like, if they had a whole bunch of X's and Z's and Y's.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Yancey, Xander, and Zidane, you're in... Oh, fuck.
You're in Team Zerzix.
So they get into the sorting hat.
So yeah,
and they get they again the world's shittest
can we
sorting hat.
please have a moment of silence, however, for Scorpion.
Oh.
Yes, and Crow.
And Crow.
Yep.
May they rest in peace.
Okay. May they rest in peace. Yeah, that's the most memorable
characters are already out of the narrative. They're already dead. Giant Scorpion and giant Crow.
Maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll run out of villains.
Their motivations were understandable.
So we get the next story where, Weiss, of course, is not happy with not being the leader, and RWBY is a complete idiot in every way, shape, and form because she has to be wacky.
And then you have the ninja furry girl and the sister, who's just there to be the cool sister.
Yeah. Well, yes, but in terms of the conflict for this next
I'm just saying we have to make
episode. Oh, right, yes. So we then have a thing where the teacher lets a live animal in the middle of the classroom, and it works out just fine because the animal is not going to just attack everybody. It's just going to attack the one person not wearing a school uniform.
I want to say this is probably the biggest
battle.
Harry Potter thing of like your Harry Potter comparison. Like that screamed Harry Potter to me. Like defense against the dark arts.
That's why I said Harry Potter.
That element in particular screams like Harry Potter. Yeah.
It's like, and they even have like the Hagrid character.
Which, by the way, that's the episode where they just ended the episode in between a transition. And inside that transition, she goes from school uniform to like her regular uniform.
They didn't want to try to explain her changing her outfit. So, how's that going to work in the movie?
If they make it a movie, then
did it fade out there? Just fade in clothes, or what? Did she? Never mind. I don't even care.
Well, no, again, it's like a video game where characters have on screen, when they're around the world map, they look different than they do in battle. That's clearly what they were going for here.
It's Persona. They're playing Persona.
Even less, because the Persona characters remain consistent between the battle and the world map.
Oh, yeah, I guess they do. Huh.
So it's even worse than
I was thinking in Persona 4, when they go into the Persona world, they have the different outfits, but in the regular world...
Oh, that's true, yeah. Never mind, you got it, yeah. I was just thinking in terms of battle.
Yeah.
But again, like, they have the school uniforms, but then it's kind of random when they wear them and when they don't.
Yeah.
I think they're there just for fan service, and even then, the best part about those uniforms is that the way none of the clothing is actually kind of modeled.
Yeah,
they are literally. It's like playing Animal Crossing and just trying to create the textures through shading bitmaps that they just applied to their chest. So like the collars, the ruffles, the ties, and they don't actually fit over. Let's say, especially with the female characters, they don't fit over the boobs in any way that makes any sense. So like it really betrays the idea that these are literally just bitmap textures being projected onto these bodies.
Okay, but you do bring up a good point because they show a later class with a character played by Joel Heyman, the kooky crazy professor.
Oh, the wacky history professor.
Yeah, and some of them aren't even in uniforms. Yeah,
well, none of this is funny.
Yeah,
It is like watching a comedy episode of Bleach.
Yeah.
Well, no, they're all supposed to be the fucking funny one. The Hagrid character is supposed to be kind of pretentious, and he's old timey. Bartholomew is supposed to be wacky coffee guy. You have the crazy comedy girl in the yellow team. Like it's like watching an episode of Bleach when they do like the comedy thing. So it's like, that character's acting really inappropriately. Oh, I'm so embarrassed.
Honk.
That's the joke. Yeah, that's pretty much the joke. Like, every character, every type of gag is done in that structure of watching not even good comedic anime, just really clunky.
Well, it's because they're watching
It's funny because the
action
characters
anime.
are yelling at each other. That's really what it
really
is.
because they were watching action anime, and they decide, this is the paragon of comedy right here, Bleach.
Which, by the way, to listeners, if it seems like we're kind of sidetracking a lot from the plot, we've basically explained 14 out of 16 episodes of the plot.
Yeah, because that's the thing. We are almost done already.
It took quite a few to get to that point.
The thing is, there isn't
but
much
then
there,
they dump a ton of plot on you in the very end, and none of it is interesting.
Well, they add a fucking robot girl.
Well, hold on. We have to get through. We talked about John's arc, but then they have to
yeah.
actually have it. So they have the whole thing with the white girl. I'm just gonna start using the colors. White girl is basically, I want to be a team leader, and they're like, no. And then we go through John's arc for like 4 episodes or something, where he's getting bullied.
Yeah.
And then he helped.
Generic Saturday morning cartoon.
And then he fights a monster that spooks the bullies, and the bully's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And it turns out.
Do you remember on the stream? He wanted John to throw a jar of jam at them to summon rapier wasps, and
the wasps never show up. It's a bear.
Yeah, and we didn't hear rapier wasps at first.
Yeah.
Oh right, yeah.
But yeah, they wanted to like splash your friends with this honey. He's like, no, and then a bear shows up, and then apparently Pyra, the competent one from his team, who helped him out and explained the concept of the fightings, has magnet powers. Was that established before now? That she was fucking Magneto?
No.
It's like, oh, surprise, I'm Magneto.
And all she did is she slightly moved his shield a little bit.
She did his sword fighting for him. He's that bad.
Well, no, I think she just did the shield, and then he stabbed the thing in the head. That was it. Like, it wasn't even all that much help. Or at least it was really hard to tell what the fuck she was actually helping with.
I do like the comical reaction that they had at the end of that. It's like, you're a master of magnetism? And it's like, oh my god, fucking Magneto.
You have your super speed, and this person has this power. And then I think she uses some new word to explain superpowers, is magnetism.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Oh.
So now they have a word specifically for their superpowers that apparently they all have.
Which, by the way, I'm already calling it now. Ruby's going to have like the God particle, basically.
No, she apparently has speed.
Oh, is that hers?
She's
Yeah,
cool
that's
and
what
blue,
they said.
just like Sonic the Hedgehog, except she's red.
Yes. So after that arc is actually kind of completed, and you actually see like a connection being formed between the yellow guy and the red
social
girl,
link has
like
been
some
formed.
kind. Yeah, well, again, like at least like there's time spent with them talking and coming to consensus, and like some kind of background or like connection.
They're both team leaders, and I was from moment one when they introduced.
Well, no, I'm talking about the other red girl, competent one.
Competent one.
Yeah.
Well, the one that wants to help him improve and things like that. Where it's like it's actually like an okay arc. Again, it's not great, but like it's something. Mm-hmm. Like that's the closest. And so once that's over, we then go right into we now have a tournament.
We got to go to this festival
because Dragon Ball.
We have to go to this festival for the tournament. Yeah. And then the racism plot came in all of a sudden.
Yeah, you mentioned like the tournament, but the tournament was like there for about like a minute.
Did it actually happen?
And then
Well, no, it hasn't happened yet.
Oh yeah.
They were all going there
from
to
the
do
other.
it, but it just never happened.
Yeah, all the students from other Hogwarts were coming in from the ship, and that's where they ran into
Monkey Man,
Sun Wukong, and
Robo Girl,
a bunch of other.
And then
stuff.
the racism happens because all of a sudden white girls all like, you damn animal people, and what's her face? Cat girl is all like,
it turns out I am. Oops.
Well, no, it took them forever even to get to that though, because they drew it out forever. And then a robot showed up.
Well, because they added Robot Girl.
Because then Robot showed up. Why was there Robot there? What did that add, Robot Girl? What did that add?
Teach me how to love.
Like, what was the point of that? Like, she's like, oh, you're my friends, Robot Girl. Like, oh, I've got friends
there's
now.
No narrative purpose.
And then she helps fight Helicopter later. It's like, that's it. It's like, why is that a thing?
There's no narrative reason. It's there to check the boxes of characters that people find attractive.
But even the other ones feel like they fill some sort of character archetype. This is not even like a character archetype. Like, it's not the cool, cold, quiet one who's secretly got a secret past. She's a secret animal terrorist or whatever. This one's like, oh, she's robot? She's there to help do robot thing, eventually? Kind of?
Well, again, I think her arc is just going to be, I want to learn how to interact with other human beings. Teach me how to love. Like, that's going to be
of course,
like,
yeah.
that's how they're always going to be. It's
that's her, like, her caricatures arc, like her archetypes arc, the stereotype of the arc for that. But what's her narrative point? There isn't one. She has ability, sort of personality point. She's just there.
Well, no, she's there in the fandom checkbox list.
Like for 2 seconds or 2 episodes, she is there just to eventually fight a helicopter.
Well, I think it's technically one episode because it's part 1, part 2.
Is that
so?
It was like 2. But anyways, but the thing that go with the whole thing is that the white girl tries hunting down the monkey because racism. And then she reveals that she's an anime person, or animal person. She's an anime person, though.
She's an anime person.
They're all anime people. But this is then the robot's following them around for some reason during all this because she wants to participate in the tournament. And then animal girl decides that she wants to do something about the animal terrorists, the animal people terrorists, the fauna terrorists that are supposedly maybe around. And she discovers, oh, there are in fact some terrorist people around here, and they're working with the guy with the hat from the first episode to steal things of
Clockwork Rufus.
Yeah, we don't know what they're stealing, but they're stealing things. And then she fights them with Monkey Man, Sun Wukong, and then the cops show up. And that's it. The main character is not involved in this whatsoever.
No.
And then it ends. That's it. That's the.
Well,
that's
no,
the arc.
she's involved at the very end when like they all go in and fight.
Did they actually fight
Yeah.
at the end? I thought they just kind of left.
That's when Robot Girl showed her like.
Oh yeah, that's when the Robot Girl did everything. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, like here's the other thing is like, you know, so Weiss is kind of the character that's supposed to seemingly, well, except maybe one time I think RWBY learns a lesson of some sort about like, oh, I have to not be an idiot.
See, I have to be competent-ish.
Yeah, but the thing is like Weiss's character turns, as in why she suddenly decides to learn her lesson. Why? There's nothing in there where she suddenly sees the error of her ways or anything. She just goes, "Oh, I understand now. Like I now I learned my lesson."
You guys are people.
There's no logical you don't see the logic connect with her at all.
That's because
so like. Again, so because we've never seen her past and we don't really have any emotional connection with her, and then the fact that her character turns don't even have logic displayed, those emotional payoffs are even more unearned than they were before.
The thing is, she goes through like these three times essentially, because she has the first like, oh, RWBY, I guess you're competent, I guess, and you're not that annoying, you can fight good, and she does the same thing, oh, I guess you're probably an okay leader and I should give you a chance. And then later on she goes, oh, I guess all animal people aren't, animals and deserving to die. It's like that.
Yeah. She gets over her Rush Limbaugh phase pretty quick.
It's just like all of a sudden she's basically like, oh wait, the person that I'm rooming with is an animal person. Well, this is awkward. I guess I should stop being, racist about this stuff. And it's like, okay. That's it.
So yeah, and then like at the very end you have like a little PS where we go back to the first plot. At the very beginning
with the guy stealing materia on Fun Day.
Yeah, where we're introduced to the girl that's played by the cosplay lady and
the witch and assorted other characters that don't really have any value or meaning to us, other than presumably they should.
Well, again, it's like the ending of a Lost episode where it's like, ooh, here's a new twist. Did that pay off? No.
I don't know. They're setting up all these characters, and it's like, why do we care about any of this? And it's like, you don't.
So
they're just there.
Well, again, because it's not spending the time to, again, past is fucking prologue. It's not spending the time to give reason or emotional clout to anything. That's, I think, really the big. I mean, apart from generic, being generic, it just can't get you to care beyond a superficial level. It tries really hard to be badass, and that's, I think, what it's trying to do in terms of, trying to be appealing. Like, I think what I want to come down to next is why. So it has enough of a fan base to warrant getting apparently a second cour or season or whatever the fuck it is,
and merchandising.
And merchandising. So apart from just saying some people like shit. That which is a bit simplistic and a bit too cynical for what I want to do here. Why do you think it is successful? Like what makes it appealing?
That's an easy one. They pander to the exact right audience.
I guess, but I kind of want to get into a little bit deeper than that.
Yeah.
I'd say that I think one of the things that made it appealing is the fact that he did establish this world and he set up these rules where people can create their own original characters. I think it has the same appeal, like have you ever looked at like an MMO and you look at all the classes and you think, what would I do? What would I how would I express my, version of strategy and ideas in this kind of world? Even if you're never actually going to play the game, that thought kind of comes
or kind
in.
of like the
And I think
homestuckiness of everybody making their own fan trolls or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it allows that type of fantasy escapism. I think the nature of doing it in a school, I think it's relatable in the regard that, yeah, we've all been through school, but there's the fantasy escapism is that they're not learning typical school stuff. And again, I think that's the appeal of things like Harry Potter and things like that, where it's both familiar and exotic at the same time.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with Naruto. They're going to school, but it's a different, it's familiar and alien. And again, there's so much variety in the kind of random abilities and weapons and appearances that it's very easy for someone to just kind of create something and kind of bring themselves into that universe.
I wonder how much of it is.
I think
I do wonder how much of it is accessibility as well, though. Like the fact that it's simply there and it's baby's first anime, so people watch it because this looks different, and then they just buy into it completely. It's the same reason that, say, Bleach is such an insanely popular thing in the U.S., despite it being, dull as shit, endlessly
and unpopular and increasingly unpopular in Japan.
For those not aware, by the way, Bleach actually got canceled in Japan. Like, just completely, it's like, no more of this. We're not making this anymore. You're not making any money.
Well, at least the anime
did. Well, the manga's getting kind of like where they're all like, you're going to end this now. We're going to give you enough time to finish this up, but you are going to end this now. Because it basically fell way out of popularity because God forbid, it takes forever for anything to happen. It just, but anyways.
Yeah.
The same sort of thing. It's the same sort of thing where it's just like, it's there. People watch it, and then people just kind of like attach to it because I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. Why are people in, say, the U.S. why are they huge Bleach fans? Because it's, it's shonen-y and people like shonen-y stuff, and it's the shonen-y thing that's put in front of them. With RWBY, it's on YouTube. It's, very easy to see.
It's on Crunchyroll too.
So yeah, it's everywhere, and people just watch this stuff. It's basically tailored to be super generic anime /RPG /fantasy product. So it fits and hits all those sort of demographics in the most generic sense really well. I mean, what is the target audience you think for this in terms of like age and overall demographics?
14.
I'd say
I'd say 14-ish, yeah.
14 male.
Male or female?
I'd say both, because with anime there's a pretty good female contingent with that, and I would say that it's not just limited to like a lower bracket. I think it goes from like 14 and then all the way through like 20s at this point.
Probably, yeah. But the thing is, I would say
and
it probably skews, I would say, towards the lower end, because I would think the more experience people have with the more people know about anime, the more their standards tend to kind of change, because they kind of see, there's a lot of stuff like this. There's a lot of stuff, better than this or different from this or doing things more actually aligned with my interests. The novelty and the accessibility of it's probably what drives a lot of it, because this is here. Anybody can see it. It's on YouTube. And it might be like, say, the first really new thing that someone sees. I don't know if it's like the first anime someone sees, but it's kind of like, it's really entry level, it feels.
Yeah, well, I think there's also maybe an aspect of people really wanting it to succeed, in the sense that, finally we can actually have this type of show made in the U.S. by people here, or like fans can finally make their own thing. And that, I think, to some people might be kind of exciting, and so they really want it to be good on some level in their head. Because it speaks to their own desire to be a creator or to, be able to make something.
Yeah.
How much of the audience for RWBY is driven by, just people running into it or being shared, or how much of it is actually driven by Rooster Teeth already having an audience? Like, is it the Rooster Teeth that's flowing into RWBY and then it's keeping people around, or is RWBY like an influx into Rooster Teeth?
I'd say with the audience there is a three-way split up. You have, I'd say about 30% came from not only Rooster Teeth, but Monty's fans before Rooster Teeth, from Dead Fantasy and Haloid. Because those were posted on Game Trailer, and they were popular among the game community. I'd say 30% is probably about the people that just kind of see it online and may have an interest in stuff like that, or might like some of the design aspects of it, for better or for worse. And then I'd say another 30% are just anime fans, which it definitely panders to, especially with the premiere of it. It premiered at A-Kon, which is a big anime convention. Which, off topic, I was actually hosting a panel at the same time it premiered about
I'm sorry.
otaku.
Well, I think what RWBY also is kind of it's a success of marketing in the sense that not only is it a part of this already existing brand, so it's able to kind of ride on that, but having it being on Crunchyroll gives it this kind of air of legitimacy.
Yeah.
You know, like this is a anime thing, and again, I think it brings a lot of aspirational people to.
Plus, they're having action figures made by a rather prolific action figure maker, which is McFarlane Toys, who have made like Akira figures and have made they made the series of horror movie monsters with like Freddy and Jason.
Well, how much of that is the other way around, though? Like, oh, this is popular enough that they're able to do this. Like, oh, you got to market, we'll do it.
Or they were commissioned to do so.
Or how much of it is them like throwing money? Like, hey, we'll give you, $100,000 to make these toys. Like, okay, all right, it's your money.
In terms of licensing, so. The thing is like I think a lot of this kind of it's like an evolution of that kind of the fanime movement when you see it on YouTube. I mean, yes, most of those are either satirical or just really fucking hilarious MS Paint things, but I think this is kind of like an evolution of a lot of different things. I think RWBY came about from I think it's really emblematic of kind of like the new media universe in which we exist. So we have this mixture of Kickstarter, we have these kind of independent, kind of quasi, monolithic companies that are kind of developing on the media landscape of the internet and YouTube and things like that. And I think it's very nature of being this kind of pastiche of all these different things kind of fits together and oddly. It's very emblematic both of its content and of its kind of a status of what it is, of what the series represents, in that like, oh, this is a completely new media venture. It's a new production model venture, essentially.
It's actually an interesting thing that now, better way to think about it, when you made the thing like, oh, an inspiration's probably a Black Rock shooter. That has a very similar sort of genesis in that they had this song, and then someone made a character, and then some people started making, other stuff about this character. And then eventually they made this anime about schoolgirls that secretly, they kind of have this alternate reality where these characters interact with CG anime fighting, and it's, it looks exactly like RWBY's fighting stuff, almost exactly, except higher budget, mind you, which is somewhat surprising for some reason. And even that's popular because it's like, oh, it's anime's fighting. That's all it really needs.
Yeah. Well, I think there's also something maybe a little bit deeper there. Like, you're talking about the fact that there's this kind of collaborative aspect. It was kind of collectively through various fandoms and various people
that's
wished
kind of
into being.
Existence. But the thing with RWBY seems like it's very heavily driven by this Monty Oum character, who's basically conceiving every little aspect, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, I would say.
But he's also having a lot of people. He created a guide for other people to make their own original characters. He is thinking about including, this fandom's contributions to.
Isn't he like auctioning off or doing some sort of drive to develop?
It's a contest. I think it's a contest.
He has a contest going on right now to pick the battle outfit for the Rabbit Girl.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
So that type of thing, again, I think it really definitely feeds into the fandom aspirational aspects. I think a lot of fandoms in general, like one of my big critiques of fandom overall, whether it is anime fandom or Adventure Time fandom, is that I think a lot of fans these days, especially with artists being very interactable, as opposed to being kind of sectioned off from the public, is that fandoms really kind of like to have the idea of entitlement in the sense of they want to have creative ownership of the thing that they like. And this type of show and this type of malleability, and the fact that I think it does come from all these different elements, really feeds into that desire. I think there's an emotional kind of aspect to why people like this. I mean, if you look at it on the outside just in terms of, like, I'd say quality, No, it's not as good as what's out there. I think there is something in the culture around it that is the primary appeal.
Yeah, but with something like this, it felt like he wanted to make something really original, but he almost took too much from other sources to where if you were to take all the references away from this show, you would have nothing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what is there that's actually original here that feels like an actual unique idea? Almost all of it is just like references. Like the only really stuff that feels like okay, the color theme is literally the only major original idea that feels like it's here. It's like, what is that? What is that? What does that matter? How is that at all interesting or like valued? It's like this is the only unique and like thing that feels like you put any energy heavily into creatively, and it's like, okay, so what?
And then to what end?
Yeah. We were actually talking about this a little bit before the podcast. When I was just looking at stuff, I was actually looking for a present for Shirokujo for his birthday, for his birthday. I was looking for a nice little RWBY present for him. And I was just looking through eBay to see if there's anything cheap. And I came across a lot of cosplay props, and I noticed that one of them looked really familiar. There's a character named Adam in the trailers whose weapon, and I want to see if you recognize this, is a red sword with a trigger on the hilt that shoots the sword out. Someone on
Is it Jetstream
eBay,
Sam's sword?
It's basically Jetstream Sam's sword, and on eBay, someone actually repainted Jetstream Sam's sword and tried to sell it as Adam's sword.
Oh, well, that makes me laugh.
Hey, if there's a market, I guess people will go for it.
I wouldn't expect
doesn't
someone
look the same, but I mean,
would not expect that though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Metal Gear Rising cosplay stuff repainted as RWBY stuff. Okay.
Yeah, apparently it was completely coincidental, which I will go ahead and say that's probably true because the trailers came out as the same time as like Metal Gear Rising did. So unless he put it in at like the last week or so of development, which wouldn't surprise me either, it probably was just a coincidence since it's kind of an anime idea, a sword that shoots out of the hilt.
Yep.
Well, a lot of that is.
Yeah.
I mean,
but Metal Gear Rising Revenge is gloriously anime, whereas this is just...
Where I did not recommend RWBY earlier, I would highly recommend Metal Gear Rising Revengeance to everybody. Play that game.
Well, okay, so I think we're kind of winding down to conclusions.
Yeah, but before we stop, I have a bunch of facts I want to shotgun real quick.
Okay, definitely. Well, we have conclusions, and I also want us to do some suggestions for
this.
So go ahead.
Let's see. Going down here, DVD commentary was kind of weird because they would be making gay jokes about the characters sometimes, the male writers and developers. Monty is 30 years old and is known for wearing cosplay wigs in his everyday life. Let's see. Currently holding a contest to make a costume for Velvet and has over 1,000 submissions. It's the number 2 watch series on Crunchyroll.
Sigh.
It has. I'm gonna guess behind like Attack on Titan.
Probably.
Or One Piece. That's on there
It
too.
has won an award for Best Animated Series, the IAWT Awards, which, by the way, this is the same year that Bravest Warriors came out, which is a show by Pendleton Ward.
Yeah.
Let's see. 2 months after Haloid came out, he was hired at Midway Games to be a combat designer before moving on to Namco Games to be a combat designer and animator.
That's really sad as well.
Let's see. Fans currently making a fan video game. Season 2 has already started. That should be most of it.
Okay. What can we kind of conclude and what can we kind of learn overall from RWBY itself? And I guess I'll just start real quick in that I think what RWBY really represents in a lot of ways creatively is that it's similar to how teenagers and children are really only kind of able to reassemble and kind of repeat what they see. And I think one lesson that we can really learn is that exposing yourself to a lot of different genres, not just within anime itself, but maybe in terms of literature, television, film, gives you a broader basis to judge content in terms of, is this original or is this new, or how is this structured, what works, why does it work, what doesn't. I think what RWBY represents, both in terms of both the creative side and the fans, is just not having been exposed to a lot of different things and not able to think outside of a very narrow paradigm of thought. So I think the big lesson from RWBY is, I mean, besides planning your production accordingly, with a good software and understanding what aesthetic you're kind of wanting to go for, but it's the idea of expanding your horizons in terms of the content that you consume gives you so much more meat to work with, essentially, creatively. I think that's what, if I was going to take one big lesson from RWBY, as a cautionary tale, essentially, I would say that's the lesson I would learn.
I will go ahead and say that, like, for all the crap I've given it, and I will always point out when something is, like, bad, and I thought RWBY was bad, but I don't hate it. I thought it was a glorious experiment and a glorious failure. And the fact that it's popular, I'm not going to fault it for that. It had the right audience that it was pandering or advertising to. It really doesn't matter too much, but I think if it wants to be like a good show, it needs to go through a complete overhaul to actually to fix a lot of the problems it has. I can't really say like exactly what they would have to change, but I think it has the potential to be a good show. I truly do think it has the potential. It just really needs to work at it, and I think at this point, with the fan following it has, it's not going to get that help.
And Zorak?
I hated the shit out of this. It's not really, like, the worst thing about it is, okay, it looks like crap. For one, it just looks like crap, and I for those people who aren't familiar with me, I do watch a fair bit of anime and that sort of thing, and so obviously my standards aren't really high because a lot of anime looks like crap. This looks like crap. This looks just bad. I realize they're working with their requirements, but it looks bad. It just looks. There's such stuff. Some of the stuff just looks like QCing. Just they could have done. The writing is terrible. It is not funny. The plot, it's like, it doesn't really feel like there's an overarching plot at all. You can kind of see that there's a direction that they're sort of aiming to, but the way they're approaching it, it's dull. They don't know if they want to be episodic or if they want to be, an overall cinema sort of movie thing. It just doesn't, it feels like crap. But the worst thing of all, the worst part of it, it's dull as shit. It is boring. When we were watching this, all of us watching this together, and a bunch of friends with other people, I often just found myself just zoning off into the distance because it's just like, oh, you're still happening. Things are still going here. This is so boring. Everything about it is just dull and crap. And just like the narrative, it feels like he just got so lazy with the overall narrative. Like he just had things he wanted to do with like the story and character archetypes he wanted to include because he liked that character archetype. He liked that design. He liked that concept. But it just overall just compromises the bare narrative that he wants to present. So just from moment one, he could have done things completely different and made the narrative make so much more sense and set up things so much better and make you actually maybe even like these characters. But everything is just so goofy anime, fantasy RPG. Oh, I took this from Final Fantasy. It is all plucked out of things. But like I said, the worst part of all, it's just boring. It is snooze-worthy. Yeah. Even the action scenes just don't feel like they have any weight to it. I don't feel any involvement in it. I don't feel any emotional connection other than me loving that scorpion. That's all I've got is the scorpion.
Be honest, you love the
Scorpion and Crow OTP.
You love the Scorpion and the Crow just because they almost killed those characters.
Absolutely. And also because I felt like I could actually understand their motivation and like where they're coming from. Like, okay, this horrible scorpion monster, I'm living in this cave. and some jerk comes in here just screaming in my face and touching my eye globes, I would be pissed off too, and I will want to kill them and their friends. That I can understand. That character, very base, very simple, very understandable. We know where he's coming from, cave. We know where he's going, to stab some people in the face with his tail stinger.
You know,
very understandable.
That giant...
And that crow probably had
Well,
chicks.
I was going to say that giant bird...
Like, it was carrying those two... That giant bird was probably carrying those things to feed its babies. And they murdered it. They murdered
those poor baby
murder.
crows. Oh, no.
How did the bird come in? Like...
You don't see it happening. They did it off
They
screen
tornadoed
entirely.
themselves into the air to figure out where to go, and then bird picked them up.
So they probably hid it in the air.
Yeah, they probably did.
Well, no, they didn't. They didn't even show it though. That's
Well,
the
that's what I'm
weird
saying.
part.
Like well, yeah, they probably hit it in the air. It got pissed the fuck off, and then that's probably why it started attacking them, because it thought it was being attacked. It was probably just defending itself.
Well, these are soulless creatures that don't really have, like, ulterior motives other than survival.
This pulls back to the entire thing, though, that this is the core feature of the plotline, the setting. There's monsters. We need people to hunt the monsters. But the monsters don't ever do anything really that monstrous other than just get annoyed by these people messing with them, and that's it. They never show them doing anything monstrousy. We just get told that in the intro.
It's basically Sarah Palin shooting wolves from a helicopter.
It's like, I'm rooting for the wolves. I'm rooting for them.
That is the goal they have.
Yeah, they don't even, like, fight them in, like, an area that's obviously may have been ravaged by these monsters, which apparently they do. They get thrown into a forest full of them. They get put into their domain.
They invade.
They're not even a challenge or anything. The only fights that are prolonged are with wizards. Other wizards. Why are they fighting these wizards? Why do I care about these wizards? What do these wizards have to do with the monsters? Nothing. The wizards are stealing all the Pocky and the globes, and that's it. And it's like, this is the actual main plot, but the setting is about the monsters. So you have a plot that's completely divorced from Monster Time, from the Monster Mash.
Well, I guess what we can really conclude is that we really hope this was the story that was never told.
I kind of wish it was.
All right, so just to prove that we're not complete assholes and that we hate everything for no good reason, I would actually like to have us suggest maybe either an animated film or a TV series that you would suggest people watch in lieu of this. So let's start with Metal Ray.
Right now I'm watching Kill la Kill, which I think is a fantastic series, if a bit fan servicey at points.
Yeah.
I'm also watching Golden Time, which if anybody has watched the show Toradora, it's made by the same writer and it has a lot of the same archetypes in it, but it's well written to a point.
All right, and so Zorak?
Well, I'm also watching Kill la Kill right now. I don't know how much I would recommend it though. I mean, I really enjoy it. It's good, but it's at the same time it's kind of like caveat. It's weird, but I would
Would you say Kyoso Giga instead, maybe?
That one also has its own sort of, precautions about warning it just because of how incoherent it is. I might give people a stroke.
I actually have one more one.
Oh, go for it.
Okay.
If you think Kill la Kill is a little too intense and you want something that's a little calmer, then a new show started up called Space Dandy.
Of course, yeah. That almost goes without needing to be recommended. So
Space Dandy.
But I know people that haven't watched it.
It's airing on.
So what do you? So
I would recommend
Cartoon
for what's currently going on right now. I would recommend Kill la Kill, just with the caveat that So it's a little skeevy at times, and it would have been better if it was less skeevy. Mm-hmm. But it's very good for what it is still, and the skeeviness is admittedly entertaining at times. And you do have, of course, also ongoing right now, Space Dandy, which is Space Dandy. You're so well animated. The drawing is strong in this one.
There's so much love in it. I think that's really.
You can tell they're just having fun with Space Dandy. They're really just having a good time.
And if you want like a story that's episodic but still extremely entertaining and like it's extremely episodic too. It has moments where I think the first episode all the main characters die.
Many of the episodes seem to end with them all dying.
Many episodes. It's entirely based off of that. But again, episodic is not always a bad thing. If it's not trying to be grand narrative. It's not being paranoia agent. This is not what it's trying to be.
Actually, to pull it in, I would say Kill la Kill is a good recommendation of a action sword fighting sort of thing with plot that kind of analogs to RWBY in the sense that, okay, the plot exists to some degree to, kind of move towards action scenes, that sort of thing. And it feels like that kind of actually has more to its plot and what it's actually aiming for. Its plot is nuts, but it actually feels like it's all built towards it. There's an internal cohesion.
Yeah,
and it overall arcs towards it with the character arcs and your understanding of the world. Things go.
But the thing with Kill la Kill, though, is that it's also does something that RWBY kind of failed to do, which is it is kind of episodic in places, but you can't really say it is episodic, even though they have like mini plots in each episode. Like there's one plot where they make a club and like the side character ends up becoming power crazy and money crazy, and they end up fighting. But it all ties into the main plot, and it all happens for a reason.
Well, it all serves to advance the characterization it's trying to have of the Academy and the main character. Well, let's not get too much into it, so because we could always do an episode about that later. So I guess what I would suggest one's currently running, the other's not, but I would say in terms of the critique I had of RWBY is the idea of trying to earn the emotional highs that it's trying to have. Like, it's trying to score emotional points that it's not earning. I would say two series that I think really know how to set up the characters in a lot of ways and really have you care about them, and then when they have these moments where a character either, turns or makes a decision, you feel something. I would say, and they're the first one, I think it's only had 2 seasons. We're still hoping that a new one will happen, but it's called Chihaya Furu.
Okay.
And that is, it's oddly, when you read the premise, you don't think it's going to be very good, but it turns out to be kind of impressive. It's about a very old, ancient Japanese card game that was done back in the court days about the famous 100 poems of Japanese literature. And it is really interesting in that many similar sports anime, or anime in general, we'll try to do kind of like a flashback to childhood, just really short to set up a premise and relationship. This one spends 3 whole episodes really developing how, as children, these characters kind of came together and held each other up and really changed their lives. And then we come back to them and see how that has affected their future. The other one I would suggest, and it's unfortunately very long, but I think it's well worth it, and it's on Crunchyroll, is called Space Brothers. And what I find really interesting about it is that almost every character that comes on, even if they seem kind of incidental, there's something deeper going on inside of them. And you often get at least maybe either an episode or part of an episode that kind of establishes where this character is coming from. So even if they are feeling antagonistic, you understand why. And it raises the stakes of who will win, and do I want one side to either, succeed or the other. And it also has a really interesting way of establishing these character relationships. And, when certain tragedy strikes or when certain events happen, you feel a lot deeper about it because you understand why that character is so important to the main characters. How much of an effect and how much of an emotional connection. So I'd say those 2 shows are a really nice way of kind of examining, if you wanted to learn how to write something better, a way of saying, okay, past is prologue, this is how I set up a goal and set up these character relationships so they mean something.
Okay.
So that's about it. So that was RWBY.
That I wish it wasn't.
So just signing off, this is R. Magnuson, also known as Neeksy.
This is Middle Ray.
And this is Zorak.
All right. Do you guys have anything to plug, like Twitter handles or anything like that?
I am also doing a podcast called That Cartoon Podcast.
Okay. Where can we find it?
You can find it on YouTube under my channel, Middle Ray Productions.
Okay.
I can be found on Twitter at @SAZorak, and I can also be found on the Something Awful forum in its local anime forum, ADTRW.
All right. So, well, thank you guys very much. I think this was actually a really nice conversation to have, even if it was brutal. But
A little meandering, but that happens.
A little bit, but it's kind of hard with this one. So, all right. Well, signing off.
Bye.